In introduction, again, my name is Colin Coe, and I will bring up some slides here in just a second so that we have something to refer to. All right. So hopefully you are seeing this, this slide. So again, my name is Colin Coe, and we're talking about leading meetings that get somewhere. So you all in the work that you do, whether it be in your work life, whether it be in your volunteer work in the community, meetings are one of those things that we know can be frustrating, but also really is the way that work gets done. In small groups sort of is that unit of transformation. And in my role with the city, I'm in meetings probably 50% of the time. And I actually still love them. I still find them to be an incredibly rewarding way to work. And even in this virtual environment, there's a lot of people asking about some of the challenges as well as opportunities in working in the virtual environment that we'll work through here today. But what I want to kind of start with is asking just a little bit about why it is that we meet in the first place. So what I want to do is, if you're able to, is to go ahead and put in the chat, what's the biggest challenge that you face? But if you also could put in the chat, what's the purpose of most of your meetings? So when you're meeting or when you're facilitating a group, what is a purpose that you have? And even better yet, if you can, is to actually describe an upcoming meeting that you have. So if you would, in the chat, if you've got an upcoming meeting, describe, why you're meeting, what the purpose of that is, as well as what you see as one of the challenges. So let's take a minute there just to include your thoughts in chat, and that will help me kind of bring the content of this session to right where you are and with what you're working with. And if it's easier for you, if at some points in this kind of this digital environment that we're working with here for this session, if you want to raise your hand, if there's something you'd actually like to say or to share with the group, you can raise your hand, and I actually have the ability to kind of allow you to talk or give you permission to speak into the group. So feel free to do that as well if you'd like. Give folks just about another 30 seconds on an upcoming meeting you have and what the purpose is, and maybe a challenge you expect to face. Okay, so we've got some good things coming in here. Danielle is talking about just getting nerves, not always knowing if she's communicating what she needs to effectively. Betty here talking about a meeting of 2021 election for officers, and there's a concern that people won't turn out, that people won't want a job. Anne has a meeting here, team meeting announcements of numbers and deadlines. And the purpose for meetings may be staffing, problem solving, sharing tips and tricks for easier system navigation. So this is good. This gives me a sense of kind of where we're at and what we're working with the group. So the interaction here is, I think will keep working for us. So I like always in my sessions to have as much interaction as possible. But it looks like that's going to be a little bit slow. So I'll probably go through a few things and then we'll pause and we'll take some time to see what you're getting and what we can move on to next. All right, so I'm going to go back to sharing some slides here and we'll get into it. All right. So during this workshop, my hope for you in the next 30 minutes that we have now, and we'll be adjusting to work on that 30 minutes, is that you walk away with one idea that you will try at your next meeting. And whether that be something you try in your preparation or whether that be something you try in the actual such session, that's what I want to leave you with. You know, I've prepared this session to do my best, not knowing you yet about what would be useful. But ultimately what this is about is every meeting is different, and your ability to lead your groups, your topics is always different. So I'm going to be trying to provide you with some ideas here that you can use in any situation. So in this workshop, we'll start first and foremost focusing on why do we meet? It's a really important question and easy to overestimate or oversimplify maybe why it is that we meet. Second, we'll talk a little bit about why questions to answer are more powerful than topics to discuss. We'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit about how are you structuring your meetings for impact. If you only have 60 minutes or 90 minutes, how are you structuring that time so you really get the most impact out of it? And I have some resources for you. There's some free resources that you can follow up with because I'm sure you'll have lots of continued questions coming out of this. We'll talk just a little bit about facilitating for commitment as opposed to agreement. And that's what we hear in the comment right there about, you know, I'm afraid nobody's going to want a job. That's an issue of commitment. And sometimes even if we agree, we get people to agree to a job, that can be really exhausting for us as hosts and for neighborhood organizers. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how do you actually create commitment? How do you actually create that situation where people saying, I'm committed to this, I want to deliver on it, and here's how I want to help. And then lastly, one of the best things I think I can offer you today is a few very simple ideas that you can incorporate right away into your next meeting to think about how you as a group that you're meeting with can get better over time so that you're applying these things and learning from them as you go and much more applicable and relevant to your experience. So first, let's start with knowing why we're meeting. And again, this may be simple, but I think sometimes people underestimate the effort that can go into thinking about why we're meeting. So a funny kind of cartoon here on the left, but actually not a bad thing to consider of thinking about what are all the things we should be doing rather than meeting. So every time you are holding a meeting or you are facilitating, I think it is really important to think about why are we meeting and what's the value for the people who are coming to participate, right? Not only what are they going to contribute, but what are they going to get out of it and what's the experience there? And you also, in my experience, what's really important is that you really want to match the purpose of your meeting and be really articulate about that with what's going on for you currently. So what's really happening in your time. So here are a few questions that you can be using to think through your upcoming meeting. So first might be, why are we meeting? Okay, what's the purpose? But then going a little bit deeper and starting to think about what would success look like? Like really imagining for yourself, if I walked out of that meeting feeling like that was a big success, what would have made it a success? And bringing some detail and some imagination to that for yourself. Second, and we'll spend a little bit more time on this, but what are the questions that need to be answered? Okay, we're going to get into this a little bit more, but rather than just a topic to discuss, really thinking about what's the question that we need to answer collectively as a group. So we saw one in the example was about we need to answer the question of who's going to be elected or nominated into leadership positions for 2021. It could be something completely different. Also be thinking about what's most important for us now. Okay, when we talk about meetings that get somewhere, one of the reasons that a meeting may not get somewhere is that what you're working on, you may not quite be ready for. So let's say there is an important topic that you need to discuss that's out here, but really what's present and what's going on for the group or in the world or in the neighborhood, there's something more important or pressing. It'll be very hard to get results on this other thing if you're not addressing the important questions that need to be answered now. So we'll go into that. And then lastly, for you as leaders and conveners, always thinking about how does this particular meeting connect to our mission or our purpose, so that you have a sense that with every meeting, you are advancing kind of the mission or the purpose of your organization. And to try to make this applicable for you, what I've shared here is a tool that I will use sometimes. And again, this is just an idea that you're welcome to take and to try on, but it's to actually write a purpose statement for your next meeting. So you can think about that next meeting that you have coming up. And I want to give you a second right now to whether you actually want to do it or whether you want to just think about it, but try writing a purpose statement for your next meeting. And what's important about this purpose statement is not just what you're going to do, but it's how you want to do it. And it's also what's the important result that that's going to create for you or for your group. So in this case, the structure that we use is to, in a way that, so that. And I tried to come up with one that I thought could be relevant for this group. So maybe the purpose of your next meeting is to plan the annual block party. How do we want to do that? We want to do that in a way that engages new voices. And for what reason? So that we reach more people, right? Create that energy. That kind of purpose statement will help you not only communicate to the folks who might be coming what they can expect, but it will also help you structure your time in a way that you both are working toward that result, but you can also check back to see if you achieve that result. So let me pause right there and see if anybody, if there's anything really resonating with you, like really standing out from this portion here about knowing why you're meeting. So any takeaways or anything that is standing out to you from this portion. And you can just put that in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Okay, so Derek sharing, one thing that's standing out for Derek is the idea about defining what needs to happen. So really articulating what it is. Appreciating having a template here. Stephanie's talking about the template of a purpose statement is helpful. It may help members understand the reason behind the meeting and have buy-in. That's a really great point. So a purpose statement, not just for you, but it's also communicating to the folks who are going to be attending what to expect and help them mentally be preparing for how am I going to contribute to this. Great. So I'm going to keep moving here. I'm not able to, as I have my presenting up, to see the chat at the same time. So I'll be checking in back and forth. So if I miss something, I'll make sure to come back to it. Okay. So now that you know why you're meeting, what we want to talk about next is what are the questions that need to be answered? And this is, if I could give you something to really experiment with, and these are all things for you to try with, but I have found that this is one switch that I've made in my meeting facilitation that has made a big difference for me. And that is switching from just a topic to discuss to a question to answer. And that is one of the strongest things you can do as a convener or facilitator of a meeting is frame a powerful question for the group to collectively answer. So as an example of that, you know, it's the difference between a topic might be planning a block party, whereas a question to answer might be, what do we want to achieve with the block party this year? Right? And even as I'm reading this, you can think, like, imagine yourself coming to the meeting where we're gonna talk about the block party versus answer the question, what do we want to achieve with the block party this year? Another example, outreach efforts compared to the question is, what do we need to stop, start, and continue doing to reach our goal? So somebody mentioned that earlier in the examples. And then compared to the topic of service project ideas, it may be the question of what's a project that would inspire us personally? So you can, even as I read these, you can maybe start to feel the difference. But from my experience and from using this approach of framing your agenda with questions to answer, there's a few key kind of benefits or reasons that I think this is worth considering for you. First, it really invites new kinds of thinking from your group. When I hear block party planning, and that's all I have, it's easy for me to go into sort of my habitual thinking of, well, I know what we did last year and I'm going to present this and, you know, but it's going to invite new thinking. And it's also going to allow, if you share this with your members or your group before the meeting, it's going to allow them to start thinking in new ways. Okay. So you can really frame the question or the conversation that you want to be having in a powerful new way. Second is that the goal is built in. So this is a big reason for, in terms of thinking about meetings that go somewhere, is the goal is built in. We will know we have accomplished kind of this portion of the meeting when we have an answer to that question. And it doesn't have to be a perfect answer necessarily, but we could spend all kinds of time talking about a block party and never come out as a group with a clear set of maybe 3 or 4 things that are the answer to the question, what do we want to achieve this year? And the reason I like that the fact that the goal is built in is this allows you to engage everyone in being responsible for the result. So when you have a group that all knows, here's the question we're trying to answer, then everybody can start to share responsibility for the question. So rather than you, the facilitator, feeling like you have to hold all the responsibility, the group starts to share the responsibility. Third, you can use it as a progress check. So it's as you have conversation in your meetings, you can very clearly say, have we answered this question yet? Or have we answered this question sufficiently? And if everybody's saying, yeah, we've got a good enough answer, you know you're ready to move on. And if people are saying, no, we're not clear on that yet, then you have an opportunity to clear it up. And then finally, it's sort of like what I already talked about, is that everybody becomes accountable. So this is one way of planning for your next meeting that I'd really encourage you to just try out. What are the questions that you want to answer as a group? So now, once you're at the actual meeting, you're at the actual session, you've done your planning, how do you want to get started? There's this great resource and book that I encourage you to take a look at called The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters. And Priya Parker does a really great job in this book at outlining a number of things that talk about it really does matter how we meet, how we start, the context that we create. And so a little bit of energy and effort up front really can take you farther. What I want to offer you here is just 3 simple things that you could do to consider an intentional opening in your meeting. So whatever the purpose or the agenda of your meeting is, doing a little bit of an intentional opening that allows people to arrive, to get clear on the purpose, and to set an intention can really help. And these are just ideas. Again, your meeting will be different, but I wanted to make sure you had something that you could apply. So first, purpose of an intentional opening, and this could be 5 minutes, it doesn't have to be long, but just helping people arrive and seeing where they are. So like we talked about, every meeting is different. And so for you, getting a sense of where people are coming is really important. So, you know, the one gentleman mentioned the elections. I think Derek had an example of some men's group that would be coming together with lots of different ideas. This helps you as a facilitator just get a sense of where is everyone? Where are we starting from? So that you have an idea of kind of where you can go. So one simple way to do that is this question here. I like to do this as an intentional opening sometimes, and asking everybody to share is, where are you coming from? Where are you now? And where would you like to be by the end of our meeting? This is a very revealing question, and it's going to show you kind of how clear are people on both the purpose and how much energy are they coming into the meeting with. It's also going to show you if, whoa, we're in very different places about what we're trying to accomplish. So again, a little bit of work early on to get alignment on what are we trying to accomplish here today will help you go somewhere. Whereas if you don't ask this question and everybody's trying to go in different directions, that's a great recipe for not making progress within your meeting, right? So second purpose here with an opening, I would say, is to confirm your purpose and agenda. So ideally, and in this digital environment, a lot of people mention tricks and challenges for that. It is a challenge working in the digital environment, but one thing that is nice is the ability to use shared documents, to email things out, to have attachments in your like virtual meetings, I think can be really helpful. So I like to include the agenda or the questions into the meeting that we have beforehand. And if you have a practice with your groups of using a shared document that everybody can comment in, that can really work well for you. But in this purpose, what I would do is just review briefly, here's what we're accomplishing today, right? Here's does that sound right? And you're kind of checking that with everybody. And again, really checking in with each person is really important. And a simple way to do this is just to ask, are there other questions that we need to answer first? So again, that's coming back to using questions to frame your agenda. But let's say there's a question that you want to answer, that's sort of your goal for the meeting. But there's if there's something else that's really pressing or that needs to be cleared up first, it's really important for you as a facilitator to get that out on the table, because otherwise it's just going to be a distractor and a barrier for everything that you're trying to do. So putting out this question, and it gives someone the opportunity to say, hey, before we make our nominations for leadership positions, if just as an example, I think we really need to be clear on, or I really need to understand what's the commitment that's involved with being a leader. So do you see how maybe that answering that question first now will help someone contribute more fully to the agenda item that you had intended? And lastly, I do think that an intentional opening is an opportunity to invite people to set an intention. And there's a lot of brain science that shows this really matters. If people show up to a meeting and sort of expect to be entertained, as opposed to coming in with a clear intention of how they want to contribute or how they want to show up. It makes a big difference. And you can do this very quickly by simply asking people to share a one-word intention that you can share to help you be at your best today or tonight, right? So I do this in meetings at work sometimes. It's something that if these ideas are a little bit unfamiliar for you, this is a pretty easy one to try, to just ask everybody to share, hey, what's one word that will help you be at your best tonight? And maybe I share the word of listening or clarity or whatever it might be. So these are some simple ways that you can get your meeting off to a good start. So let me pause there and see just, again, anything that is resonating for you for what you're seeing here, anything that is looking useful, or any questions or maybe reservations that you have about what's being shared so far. So I'll give just a minute to see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, not seeing anything come in, so I'm going to move forward, and maybe you're still thinking about that. I did want to answer one question that I saw. Oh, Danielle is sharing. I really like framing the meeting around the question and asking others to share where they're coming from. So that's good. Before we move on, I wanted to make sure I'm answering one question here, which is has to do with the challenge of keeping meetings productive and on time. So at the beginning is also really a time, if you've got a group that you know struggles with time, struggles with staying on time, I would recommend two things. So one is upfront, set some kind of ground rules or expectations. And you may even, as a group, if it's a group you're meeting with regularly, there's a little thing called a time timer. That's a physical thing, or you could use it, but actually set a time for yourself and actually say, we're going to put 25 minutes on the clock, for this topic. And then maybe you put a process in place that says, if we get to that time, we're going to choose to have 5 extra minutes. You as a group may have some ground rules and expectations that you actually say, no, we want to finish each agenda item. And if there's anything we miss or that has to get pushed to the next meeting, then we're okay with that. But basically it's establishing some ground rules up front. It's asking people, if it is an issue, to, hey, we're going to really focus tonight on staying time. Is everyone, can everyone help us stay accountable to that? And then actually using a timer really can help. And making sure that one other small thing that you can do is you can adopt, many groups will use sort of like a parking lot concept. So if you have a group that lots of ideas are coming up and you tend to maybe get off track in going and talking about different things, you can use a parking lot idea so that when something comes up, you're not squashing the excitement that someone might have, but that sounds like a conversation we should come back to. I'm going to write that down in the parking lot, or I'm going to put it in our notes document so that we make sure we come back to that conversation. But let's, stay focused on our topic for now. And Stephanie here is sharing using the timing method before for chatty members that love tandems. And while it helps most of the time, it keeps people attentive to speak and share as well. And especially, I would say, thank you, Stephanie, for sharing that. If you can make the timer visible to everyone, then again, it's another way of involving everyone in being accountable for the outcomes of the group, so it's not falling on you. So let's get into a little bit more content here that I have for you. Just have a couple more slides of content, and then we can see where we're at. I'll pull this up again. All right. So now that you're into your meeting and you know where you're at, what I wanted to just give a note on was how to structure the questions that you're answering. So I'm inviting you to think about structuring your meetings with questions to answer rather than topics to discuss. But how do you want to answer those questions? What's the process you want to go through? And this book right here, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's a free resource online. I would highly encourage you to check it out. It's called Liberating Structures. And it talks about the surprising power of liberating structures. And inside of it are a whole bunch of different ways you can actually structure group interactions, group decisions, group conversation, and it explains everything in really great detail. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on the practices themselves. What I do want to say though is just this idea of a structure for a group really can help them achieve results. And it's not the kind of structure that you want to bind things down. It's really a structure that allows people to expand their thinking and to contribute, and allows you to be a little bit more kind of systematic almost in working through things. So this is a really great book for you to check out and to see kind of what's there and what you could use in structuring your time. So here we're kind of on to our last two items for this session. And there's a lot here, but there's a simple idea I'm hoping that you'll come away with here. And this has to do with facilitating or leading meetings for commitment as opposed to agreement. And I think we all sort of intuitively know the difference, right? Agreement is, sure, I'll do that. And commitment is, let me take that, right? It's the difference between I'm doing it because I'm supposed to, or I'm doing it because there's some outside pressure, versus commitment is, I want to offer this. This is a contribution I want to make because it's important to me and it's part of my role. And every meeting is an opportunity with the groups that you're working with to be creating engagement that builds more and more commitment. So it does happen over time, but it's something you can be doing all the time. And I wanted to share this image here on the left because I think it can really help you mentally to work through some of what you might be facing in your meetings. It's this idea of how dynamics of group decision making. And so every group decision that you make is going to start over here on the left in one way, shape, or form, right? And it starts with a new topic. And this zone here, kind of the widening on the left part of this image, is called the divergent zone. So divergent thinking is when we're intentionally thinking differently. And often what will happen is the first ideas and opinions and thoughts that are coming out, they're familiar opinions, they're coming from habit. It's sort of just recreating the status quo. If we push a little bit farther, and if you're really, as a facilitator, encouraging diverse perspectives, inviting dissent and reservations, really asking people not only what they think, but how are they thinking about it? You know, really those curious follow-up questions of, you know, I'm really curious, you know, Sarah, whatever, really curious, how did you arrive at that conclusion? What were some of the factors that you were considering and what was important to you? So this is going to kind of expand and stretch the thinking out. Then a lot of folks will take an idea and just go with it at this point, because what you come into when you're really facilitating for commitment and group decision making is something called the groan zone. And I think we're all familiar with the groan zone, but this is where you get to that point in a group decision making process where it just starts to feel uncomfortable. It starts to feel a little bit yucky. People are going in different directions. It's not quite clear what you want to accomplish. And this is a difficult time. This is the time I know as a facilitator, I start getting those nervous feelings and like, oh my gosh, am I doing an okay job? Are we going to get there? Are we going to accomplish anything? Staying present and really calm and knowing that this groan zone is a part of the process of moving towards commitment is really important. So when you reach this groan zone, don't panic. Keep moving forward through it. And if you can get through that groan zone, eventually you will start coming back to convergent thinking. Now where you've stretched the ideas and you've explored them. And now you're coming back to an answer that's going to be, one, a far better answer than you would have achieved if you had just taken one of the familiar ideas. But you're also going to have and see more commitment on this side of a decision. So again, that's just an idea I want you to kind of have in mind. But the one thing I'll offer to go with this as well is this acronym I love, which is GEMO, which stands for Good Enough, Move On. There is a time and a place with your group to practice that skill of it's good enough, move on, right? If we have an 80% answer or a 90% answer, that's kind of your job to be watching the energy of the group and facilitating for, you know, a meeting that goes somewhere is when to say, good enough, let's move on, and really important. So lastly, on this, that's during the conversation. After the conversation, and this is where some of those kind of facilitating in a virtual environment tools can be helpful. Asking openly for commitment is really, really powerful. So it could be a question like, based on our conversation, what do you see as a next step for yourself and for the group? And then building on that to actually ask and have everyone go around and share. And if they have nothing to share, that's okay. But having everyone share in front of the group is really important. And that is, what are you committed to doing between now and the next time we meet? So having people actually say out loud what it is they're committed to. What's important here, though, is that the answer of nothing does need to be acceptable, right? If somebody agreed to do something, you know, that's important, they carry up. But it's not necessarily the case that everyone will be committed. But just by introducing this language into your meetings, you'll start building that commitment over time. And then what I really encourage you to do, again, to be sharing accountability with the group, is use a shared notes document. So whether it's, you know, you can use a free Google Doc, a lot of people have, you know, Microsoft products, but just verbatim, you can verbatim document the commitments that each person has made, and you can share that out with the group. So again, everybody is helping to hold the group accountable to your next steps, as well as it creates something that you can use and come back to at the start of your next meeting. Okay, so those are just some ideas for facilitating for commitment. And then the last thing that I want to share with you, and then I want to see kind of what you're taking away from our short time today. If you could incorporate one thing to get better at your meetings, right? I put these tips together not knowing your exact situation. But if I was going to encourage you to take one thing and apply it to your situation that really will help you get better at meetings over time, is consider including a learning question in every meeting. And here's some sort of nerdy reason why on the side here. It's something called double loop learning, where if all you're doing is recreating the same meeting over and over again, and you're sort of stuck in this one loop, it's very hard to get better. A learning question intentionally invites you to look at your process. So that's that second loop that you see down there. When you start questioning your assumptions, you start looking at your process, and then you use that almost like stepping outside of the meeting to observe it and use that to inform your next meeting. And you can include a short question in every one of your meetings to start doing this. And if you're not comfortable doing it with the full group, you can absolutely do it for yourself as a facilitator. So here are a few questions you can use, you know, in your next meeting. They're that simple. So it could be, what did you appreciate about how we worked together today? And go around and have everybody share on that. Maybe what did you notice or learn about yourself or the group? What was most beneficial here today? And what is something that you want to remember or continue your thinking on? So any one of these questions will help you start getting better over time right away in your meetings. So in our last minute, that's what I'd like to invite, I'd like to invite you all to share. I did my best to sort of condense this so that we could stay on time here. I'm happy to have follow-up conversation, but for now, kind of take just a minute to think about what we've discussed here today. And in the chat, please answer one of these questions. So either what was most beneficial for you here today, or what's something you want to continue your thinking on from this session. Take a minute to put something in the chat. All right, so we've got some good things coming in here, and I see chats in two different places. Some are on Whova and some are on Zoom. So I want to make sure we're hearing these. Really liking the approach and framework. Framing the meeting around a question is something that's working for Danielle. Derek's talking about the double circle thinking and wanting to just continue his thinking on that. Using intentional language for setting purpose being helpful. The learning question is definitely going to be implemented. That's great. I think it will help me not only facilitate and extend my agenda and perspectives, but open up conversations within the group. Good. And I want to make sure, Alexandra, I get to your question. She's bringing up, and this is a really good point, is if you have a large meeting, some of these things feel like they could take time, too much time maybe. And I want to answer that in two ways, and then I'll just wrap up. The first is you can always do sort of the one word answer version to questions. That still helps people do their reflective thinking, but then give a one word answer. Or you could have people pair up in groups of 2 or 3. And so that's a quick way to have everybody engage in the question, but to move it along more quickly. The second thing I would say, though, is to experiment a little bit, and that sometimes taking a little bit of extra time on some of these how are we working questions can actually get you more results in the long term. So it's sort of both and of there are some quicker, shorter ways to do it, but investing time over the long term will help you out. So that is our time for today. I want to just put up here on the screen my contact information in case you'd like to follow up. We went through some things pretty quickly here today. So I want to just share this with you and let you know you're welcome to send me an email or chat in Whova, and I'd be happy to answer some questions and help you sort of customize some of what we covered for your own purposes. And if you've got any other questions, please let me know. I thank you for investing in your neighborhoods, your communities, your groups that you're a part of. And I hope that you found something here today that you can try and apply in your next meeting. So thank you all and have a great day.